Okay. And we are live again, Wednesday, April 8th, 2026. Our joint fiscal office analyst is with us to look at financial numbers it's quick for March. Little preview of what you'll read in the news eventually. Transportation revenue figures, where we're at and how it can impact our budget, etc. Welcome back to the committee, Logan. It's all yours. Tell us what great financial news you have.
Thank you. For the record, I'm over at the Joint Fiscal Office. I'm gonna walk through the February and then March revenue numbers as they've come in. I'll show you all how to get there. There should be some, like the summary documents. I just had two posted on the website, but I'll show you how to find all of them again, just in case I forgot. 1 second. All right, so from the General Assembly web page, you can just go to the Joint Fiscal Office link. From here, we'll do subjects, scroll down, transportation, scroll down, you'll see monthly data. You'll see I just posted all these for March.
Wait. So I go to the joint fiscal page.
Yep.
And there's featured publications. I don't think that's.
So subjects at the top bar.
Pardon me?
Subjects
Over
at the
to the
top.
left.
Top left.
Oh, subjects. Okay.
Yeah, so click that and it'll give you a drop down.
Subjects, primary
At
subjects.
the very bottom of that list, be transportation. And then on the transportation page, you can scroll down and under monthly data. If you click monthly data or down here, the view all, you'll see everything. So we'll start with February. You will maybe remember that we spoke about the February numbers briefly last week, I think, and how there was sort of some weird stuff given the reporting, and February being a short month, and how gas tax is reported, causing what we will look at here. Big enough. So as you'll see, in February, the gas and the diesel tax were significantly below what was forecasted. And that was because essentially of the reporting issues that came up. You'll see in March's numbers that we sort of make up most of the loss here. But this is just because it was a short month, 28 days. Fuel tax reporting is due on the 25th. It takes about 3 days to process. The 28th was on a Saturday, so just given the time, we couldn't process a large chunk of essentially the gas tax that was collected in February. So we're missing that portion, which shows up here. That does show up on the next March one, which we'll look at in a second. The other ones, motor fuel or motor vehicle purchase and use tax, you'll see is continuing to sort of lag behind. We've seen this for the past few months, even with the sort of decrease from the forecast, I guess not last year, not last January, but in July, it was brought down significantly, the forecasted amount by about 5.7 million. It was increased slightly, but we're still sort of underperforming in the purchase and use portion of that. Motor vehicle fees are a similar story as we've seen over the past few months, continuing to sort of underperform. And those two are sort of tied together, right? If we're not selling as many new vehicles, we're not registering as many new vehicles, and the fees and stuff associated with all of that. And then other fees and taxes had a decent increase. And we'll see in March, there were some errors occurring here, which we can talk about in a second, that sort of will impact the numbers that you see there. But in February, these were fairly decent, but a relatively small portion of total. Last month, again, this is a very skewed month, so you really have to take them in with what we'll see next, but we were down significantly, mainly because of that fuel tax receipts that we didn't see. So this is a less helpful, I guess, look, just because it is so skewed. I will just jump into March, which sort of shows us a better look, I guess, year to date, because we won't be seeing these losses here. If there are any specific questions on the February before I jump there, I can answer them, but it might be better to just okay. We'll jump into the March revenue numbers then. Bigger. This. Perfect. So you'll see in March, gas and diesel are both very much above forecast. Again, that's because we didn't collect it in February and we are collecting it in March. The numbers aren't exact because there is some variation in there, but we made a
Sorry, like revenue detail or revenue, what are you looking? at?
summary. I'm looking at the revenue summary for March
Okay.
now.
Right, thank you.
Yep. So you see that we made up those revenues. In March, we were above, but if you take the two together, we are sort of right on. If you look to the right, the cumulative year to date, you will see that versus the target in those two revenues, we are essentially right on, slightly above, but again, for the scale we're talking, these are pretty much right on target. Motor fuel or motor vehicle purchase and use, again, as we saw in February, is still sluggish. We're almost 6% below. And if you look to the right here, cumulative year to date, we're about $1.7 million below forecast, 2.3% year to date. Motor vehicle fees and other fees and taxes. So you'll see some significant sort of decrease for motor vehicle fees and increase for motor vehicle fees. This is because there was an error in past processing. A fee that should have went into the other fees category was previously going into the motor vehicle fees. So in this month and in future months, it is now going into the correct place, but you'll see sort of what used to go into motor vehicle fees now going into other fees and taxes. So a big increase in other fees and taxes and a decrease in motor vehicle fees to sort of reflect. But net between the two of them, there is no sort of significant change. It's just sort of shifting where it shows up on this monthly revenue. And then in next month, it should sort of be, it'll probably continue because the forecast assumed that these revenues were going into the motor vehicle fees revenues and they will no longer be. So we might see persistent decrease throughout the 3 months, but we should see a persistent increase in other fees because we're sort of shifting around. And then hopefully come the July forecast, the economists will take this into consideration and forward. But this is sort of an error, a misallocation error that has been occurring for a while and is now being fixed, but it's going to look a little weird in those two categories. If you sort of take them combined, though, we should be around forecast at least. You'll see if you look over the cumulative year to date, we're negative 2.6 for motor vehicle fees, positive 2.8, so slightly above for the two together. It makes it a little more difficult to sort of break out, and I could theoretically go in and look at all the specifics and take into account this sort of change to get them, but that'd be more work than I had time to do for this presentation.
Or just put another column in of actually what our target number is for the year. Because I'm simply just doing month by month, like the cumulative actual is just for adding up like what's going on, right?
For the total?
For
the
you know,
entire
whatever
target.
category, but yeah, so for like, what's the target for the FY 26 purchase and use tax?
Oh, for like the total at the end of the year.
Yeah,
Yeah, I could add that in for sure.
it's just, you know, because I'm just.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know, interesting to me if you just had that.
What number are we trying to get to?
Trying to get,
Yeah,
instead
okay.
of
Yeah.
doing like.
Yeah. And you can see the total here, but I understand your point for the categories, and
Yeah,
that is, if I jump back over to this, if we look at the details, which is the big spreadsheet that we've looked at before, I'll pull it up here. Second. We'll come back to that in a second, because I don't think I'll have to stop sharing for a second.
It could be, I don't know, maybe gain for it, maybe is it our confidence levels like our.
Yeah, we can see what the totals are,
Yeah.
and I'll come back to that in just a second. I'll just mention, year to date, we're slightly below, mainly from that sort of sluggish purchase and use. 0.6 is pretty close in the grand scheme of $320 million. But we are slightly below the forecast amount year to date. And then you can see our 12-month year-over-year sum is slightly sort of declining.
So our forecasted goals, the target, is less than what was collected the previous year. Is that fair? So that if we're minus 2.1% for in this particular case, on the other one, it was 0.7 versus 0.6. The target, we're only 0.6 behind the target, but 0.7 behind the annual number. That means our targets are actually, we expect to collect less than we had the year before. Is that fair?
No,
The last
we're
year.
forecasted to collect more money
Okay,
this year than last year. I will say where we are currently year to date, I'd have to compare it to last year's numbers to see year to date last year versus year to date this year where we were at. But in the long run, and again, June is our big sort of true up month when we see a lot of change in these. So we don't really know what has come in until June hits and the books have been closed because there is a lot of things that have to happen in that month. You'll see, and if you went back in time and looked at these from June, you'll see June is a very big month for the T fund generally. So it's really hard to look at them in month to month because you do get a picture, but you don't get the whole picture, right? You have to sort of look at it all
well, if we
together.
looked at the one that's 3 months total, and it said we were 0.75, 0.7 behind last year and 0.6 behind our target.
Hmm.
I guess it's the other tab on the other spot. That just some way that's for me, it's just not the right math, I guess. I'll have to look at it that way. But you know, if you're 0.7 behind last year and you're 0.6 behind your target, that would mean that your target is lower than your but is that for the 3 months? Is there a sort of or is it sort of an annualized number in effect, I guess is what I'm saying, is it every month by month goal? It's not just a 12-month goal, it's based on history for that particular month. It's not a 1/12. We're gonna collect
Right.
$120, that's $10 a month.
Right.
That's not like that. It's
No, exactly.
based on the annual kind of amount. February gives $1.
Exactly.
June
And
gives $4.
exactly. Some
Okay.
months we collect more than we do in other months. So when you look at it from the fiscal year and extent, we are expecting forecasted to grow. But if you pick 12 months not lining up from June to June, and given potentially sluggish revenues that might be made up for in June, right? So excluding June can sort of skew how you look at it because we might collect more revenue, say in the month of June or in the future months. So you really have to look and maybe I can go back and
I don't think you have your other tab was up there on the summary piece already or not. The next one's below after.
Yeah. I
I
mean,
just wanted to go to another question or at least illustrate what's going to happen.
let me pull up this sheet. So this is the spreadsheet with all the data in it.
There's your forecasted months. They're different. Okay.
And if we look at, so I'll wait till the vice chair's back to look at the sort of targets. But if we go into this running tab, here you can sort of see that where that year over year number comes from. And so we have it broken out by gas tax, and then there's the assessment portion, so this is the fixed portion. The assessment portion, T fund total, so it's the combination of the two, diesel, P&U, motor vehicle fees, other fees, and then total fee revenues. So as of March, right, we were sort of from March to March, we're down about 0.5%. We won't know what the actual decrease is until we get to June. Because as you'll see, let me see if I can. $391. As you'll sort of see, looking back at last year, we collected 29 million in June, 27, 27, 24, 22, right? So depending on how you look at it, you might be collecting less, but we would hope forecasting to collect. I mean, it's not a lot more. You've all seen the forecast. It's I could go, well, let's look the target. So total cumulative 317 versus 320. I feel like I'm with them. 1 second. Pull the forecast.
Pouch has a question for you too.
Yes.
So you're saying June tends to be big, is it because the tax department, like, I don't know, finds more stuff in their desks and like, oh, we never really accounted for this and,
Checks in your pocket.
yeah.
I think maybe not to that extent, but yes, there is a lot of what they're calling the end of year true up, where like
Yeah.
they go through and they go through all the numbers and they go through all the money that's been collected. All sort of the reporting little shifts and stuff, they all come true in the last one. And that's they call them the Schedule 2s, is the revenue reports that we get. They take a long time. There's many iterations of the Schedule 2s as things are sort of closed out and finalized, and we get those true up numbers.
They tend to go up.
And some go up and some go down. I don't want to, because it depends. I can't say what it will happen this year, but it tends to be, June tends to be a bigger month.
'Cause it's not a longer month. I mean, it's only,
And like last year, we know was not a great year for the T fund, and we could go back and look at the June ones. I'm pretty sure a lot of them went down at the end of the month.
But the Junes would be historically based as a target based on previous Junes. So I guess it would, this idea that it was going to make up or go down. I mean, like I said, June's not a 1/12. The target's not a 1/12. It's based on previous Junes. So I guess that you would think that trend would show, I would maybe misunderstand it that way, but the trend, the targets would wash out over the years. You know, it's June is, if it's normally higher, it's normally higher every year. So the target would normally be higher, I guess.
Yeah, the monthly target, I think, is generally higher for the June months.
So where I wanted to go, sorry, on the bigger summary page, and we're behind by 0.7% over last year and 0.6 against the goal, which was about $1.6 million. I think it was maybe 1.5, 1.6. So we're 3 months in, we're $1.6 million. Last fall, agency had to go through a pretty significant adjustment to their budget, which included the first round of reduction in force and included delaying of an internal project or two in the agency, meaning their own, one of the buildings or something else they were working on. But the reduction in force being the biggest part, as well as some other adjustments. If we're already 1.6 million behind, we're in 3 months. I think it was triggered by some number. Logan, was it triggered by 4 million or was it a percentage, right? So a percentage or a number that had come out to 4 million or 7 million, they had to cut right around in the fall. And then we had to come back and know that we had to cut again. Are we on, what's that percentage that triggers the activity that has to change to change the budget? What is and are we on that track again? I guess really is where I'm concerned that they would have to make some budget adjustments or when would they potentially have to redo the budget to match up numbers? What triggers that activity? I remember it was statutorily triggered.
Yeah,
Are we headed towards that again? What is that? And then,
there are sort of, there are two portions of it. So there are, at the end of the year, when we do the revenue true up and we get the final Schedule 2s, the agency then has to go and close out their budget. And so if we brought in less money, they have to do rescissions to sort of end the year at $0 or with a positive balance. That I believe has one sort of trigger that ties when you all get involved or the various committees, joint transportation oversight committees or stuff like that. There's also then the rescission plan last year was based on the decrease in the forecast, and that has another number. So there's sort of two things occurring here. So at the end of last year, and I'd have to go back and look what the exact numbers are, so I'll just speak roughly here. We ended the year sort of below the forecast, and so the agency sort of, Candace had to go through and balance the budget and sort of make it to zero. Then in July, we got the updated forecast, which downgraded the amount that we were expected for 26 by, it was like $7.5 million. That percentage, I think it's just like a 1% decrease, but I would want to go back and look at what the statute says exactly the percentage is. Then that required them to do the rescission plan presented to JTOC and JFC to reduce the FY27 or FY26 budget by that amount. So there's sort of two different things here. One is based on changes to the forecast, and one is based on revenue collected at the end of the year.
But there was also another one in January, right? A 1.5.
Forecast? Yeah, so that one was, so in the T fund, yeah, that was $1.5 million decrease. That didn't sort of meet the threshold to trigger I'm pretty sure it's a 1% change in forecasted revenues. So that was just sort of accounted for within, but if it gets to a substantial decrease in the forecast, which we won't know what that is until July, but
I think that was made up of the stabilization.
the stabilization, exactly, yep.
sorry, I'm not sure.
No, I don't know if I answered your original question, but there
What it is, we just saw from the, how many thousands less new vehicles. The value of vehicles continues to go up, so maybe the purchase and use will not go down as much as it was, but that chart that you just showed us shows purchase and use starting to, or lagging. You've got what we heard here, of course, about the price of gas and a move to used cars or not, or a move to, I guess what I'm saying, I'm trying to get at is we had to, for what does that trigger, which is, I guess, 1% drop in forecasted revenues. Are those the same as the targets? I assume the targets are built off forecasted revenues.
targets are built off that, yes. But the targets change every 6 months, which sort of,
So we're gonna be in this 6-month stretch. We're in 3 months of it down. We got 3 months to go. It's a 1% targeted, the 1% change on the target, which is the forecasted revenue. And we're at 0.7.
so this is where there are two different things,
I'm
right?
saying that if you get, that's not that much farther to 1%. We have another, continued slide in purchasing use, we have a slide in fees. We're gonna get there again, I guess, is what it's looking like. It is at 1%, but that's not the right way to look at it.
So it's not the wrong way to look at it, but they're not, if there's a 1% decrease on this chart come June, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to do the rescission plan. If the economists come to us and then say that they're decreasing the forecast by, I'll just say 7.5, because that's what it was last year, be slightly more than that, then it might trigger that requirement for them to do a rescission plan. But the numbers that you sort of see on the revenue page are not unrelated, but not the number that will trigger whether a rescission plan needs to be done in the fall.
I think it'd be good if you just had those year numbers on there.
Yeah, I can add that to it.
Yeah, just for future things,
Yep.
just so you can get like a sense of, all right,
What's the end
where
goal?
are we?
I'm trying to get at the idea that we'll be here through May.
Yeah,
likely,
Yeah.
but come June, July, August, and we were back from joint JTOC or the joint fiscal committee, whatever that's called, the fiscal committee. I'm saying as a member of the committee, you're looking at those numbers. I want to make sure we're looking at whether we're gonna have more work or more issues or more struggle or not. We'll see. So
be determined.
that's where to be looked at is if we're not performing. And they don't necessarily downgrade the forecast even if we're behind by more than 1%.
I can't tell you what the economists will do in the next forecast,
But that doesn't.
but revenues
Trigger
do
not.
impact their analysis, but there are also a bunch of other things that impact it.
Yeah,
So-
no, the statute triggers it. There's by statute, it's, June or June.
And I'm trying to get at, wouldn't that 1% be that statute, that trigger, if we see it on that chart?
Well, not at that particular point in time.
But I'm saying at 6 months in June, if that's more than 1% below, that would not then be a trigger. That's what I guess I'm trying to understand as we monitor that goes through.
I think I'd have to go and look at the actual revenues collected is separate from a downgrade to the forecast. A downgrade to the forecast, just because we
1%
collect.
behind doesn't mean that the forecast is gonna change.
Right, and we want, until the forecast changes, we won't know if there needs to be any sort of action taken that needs to be approved by one of your committees, or one of the joint transportation or joint fiscal committee, until we sort of see what the forecast numbers are.
This is a new year, new fiscal year. So we're just closing out one, but yeah, it doesn't necessarily trigger to carry
But
over.
as you
to next
often
year.
remind me that it's all based on estimates.
Yeah, that's so,
It's all based
Yeah.
on estimates. So,
yeah,
I didn't think that much, didn't always worry quite as much, I guess, as I do, look at what that may or may not trigger. And last year's was painful trigger.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you have another question? Okay. Well, thank you very much. And Damien has arrived. I guess we'll switch spots and go back to the T-bill in section 24. I think we were about to look at what are the changes in vehicle inspections. Thank you very much, Logan.
Anytime.
Should be at least before you get a better. Trying to save some state budget here, you know?
Good, doing good.
Yeah. That accordion file's probably been with us for 10 years.
Yeah, because it's in like a new year, so it's like a new forecast. You would have to see how it syncs up with the F400, like for these. Because it might not be 100%. You know, 'cause it's a new fiscal year. So
I guess I feel like those actual numbers that have been reported,
yeah,
I've understood.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Why is it not more specific? How can you tell people that? Well, you don't know. I told you, but these are freaking actual
Numbers, yeah, yeah.
It shouldn't be such a guessing, I guess, about.
yeah,
Wait for what? We have historical Jews, we have historical.
yeah.
We know that the estimates are at, or the forecast, I understand that it doesn't matter, but
Yeah.
if you're triggers, it
It
does.
does.
I think those spreadsheets and the numbers are like that. Now they're seeing the difference between this forecast and our targets then.
Because when you do the 12-month rollback, it doesn't sync up sometimes. Yeah, to the fiscal year, yeah. Yeah, I know.
Are you, you're still working on getting? Yeah.
I'm on my way into the Zoom room right now.
So my mumbling is not detracting from where we're at, I'm not holding up the show.
Hopefully, no. Yeah.
Oh, I do that plenty. I do.
Right. Well, I'm ready when you are,
You
so.
are, well, Dan, welcome back. Gotta pull out my V bill, flip to section 24, which is page. Anyone? You?
29.
Page 29. Welcome back, and let's see what the Senate thought we should do to vehicle inspections. I've heard there's been lots of discussion. There was all kinds of social media, there was a public hearing, there was all kinds of activity. What did they do with all that feedback? What did they come up with?
So what's in this bill? You've seen, I think S211, which would related to 2-year inspections. And so that was a report back on the transition to 2-year inspections. This is actual direction to amend the inspection manual. And this is language that the department proposed to the committee. So it would direct the department to amend the inspection manual to increase its focus on vehicle conditions that constitute genuine safety issues, eliminate outdated procedures, and provide clear, consistent guidance for both inspection mechanics and members of the public. So the specific amendments or the intent that's expressed in here is that the amendments to the manual would only require failure of an inspection when the condition of a vehicle system constitutes an immediate safety risk, and that a vehicle owner would be advised of conditions and components that do not constitute an immediate safety risk, but may become a safety risk at some time in the future. So, for example, if there's a component that is deteriorating, but it hasn't triggered a failure, but that the individual will want to keep an eye on it, or perhaps have the car back in to have it looked at again in 6 months or something like that, the mechanic would advise them at that point. Say, your brakes are still okay, but the lining seems to be wearing out prematurely. You should probably have that checked out in a few more months. That way the person's aware of it.
You got a question?
Damien, so is this going to be on the official sort of report that you get, the inspection? Is this a verbal or a written?
Great question. It would come the same way. So I can only speak to what I get from my mechanics. I don't know if there's a requirement. I think I'd defer to the department on that. I know with my mechanics, so one of my cars goes to the dealership, the other one just goes to a local mechanic. In both those cases, they'll tell me what I need to fix to pass inspection. And then frequently, they'll say things like, so with my older car, the last time I went through, they said, it's not a problem right now, but we're going to want to keep an eye on the subframe. We're seeing some pretty heavy corrosion down there. And so kind of a preview of coming attractions.
So is
that
it verbal to you or?
I was, so on there's a short summary that was from the dealership. They included a short summary. My other mechanic will kind of run down issues with me and say, verbally, we'll run down the issues and say, we had to fix this to pass inspection, or we have to fix this to pass inspection. This isn't a problem, but your tires are getting low. They've only got 1 season left.
It seems like if we're going to back off a little bit, which I'm not saying I'm for or against, seems reasonable, but you're saying, geez, you got 1 more year on the rust or whatever,
Yes.
that you would put that on the report only because next year you just go to somebody else. Right? Instead of,
Get a year reprieve again.
but according to this, it doesn't say one way or the other.
Yeah, it doesn't say how it has to be done. It just says advise of conditions that may become a safety risk at some time in the future. So, which I think both the examples I gave, a subframe that is rusting out and tires that are nearing the end of their useful life, are both potential future safety risks. But at this point, they're both, they both pass inspection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just advice.
Yeah, how would this work with the tablets? I mean, it was, when you put the tablets in, it was like there was no way, there was a record, we could go to another garage if we failed inspection at one place. I mean, is this gonna be, so that's one question I have. And the other is, did I see somewhere, but I don't see it here, about the emissions test and how is that all gonna work?
So emissions test is under the jurisdiction of ANR. So that's for our compliance with the Clean Air Act. So there's two pieces to your inspection. There's vehicle safety, there's emissions. This is focusing on safety issues because that's within DMV's jurisdiction. The emissions test was probably discussed in the context of S211. So one of the issues that comes up with eliminating inspections, as has been discussed, is that currently under the Clean Air Act, our state implementation plan, which is still pending approval by EPA, it's had to be revised and so forth, requires us to engage in what's called enhanced inspection and maintenance for emission systems. And that's a function of where we are in the country. We're in what's called the ozone transport region, which unfortunately means the prevailing winds blow everyone else's air pollution over the Northeast. And so the Northeast has stricter emissions requirements under the Clean Air Act than many other regions of the country. And in other areas, it'll be focused on like the Los Angeles metropolitan area or the Denver metropolitan area. In the Northeast, it is an entire region of states. So our neighbors to the east in New Hampshire, as many of you have likely heard, repealed their inspection requirement last year. It took effect in January. Only 2 days before that took effect, the federal court granted an injunction that stopped the law from taking effect pending the outcome of the EPA's review of New Hampshire's petition to get a waiver from the enhanced inspection and maintenance requirement under the Clean Air Act. So if you want to revise the emissions inspection side of this, if you move to a 2-year, there's likely changes that have to happen to it to ensure that you continue to stay in compliance, or you need to get an EPA waiver. And that both are possibilities. My understanding, based on the latest news out of New Hampshire, is that the EPA is working to expedite review of the waiver request and hoping to have that review done by the end of 2026. But until we see what happens there, we don't have a good sense of what might happen if Vermont did that. But either way, to get rid of inspections, you need to address that. Within the context of this section,
Not getting rid of inspection.
not getting rid of inspections, not even addressing the emission side of it. This is focused on safety. This is things like surface rust on brake rotors causing a failure when the brakes are, I believe, was it the commissioner who was in the other day who talked about how if you drive a half mile down the road, you can rub that rust off. So that's one of the things that they're looking at. There are other things, tests that aren't done regularly that are in the book. But they're not done except by a handful of mechanics. And so taking some of those out, some outdated tests that related to older style vehicles, adding clarity about where rust is a problem on the body versus where rust is not. So right now, the language can be a little bit vague. So body rust can trigger a failure, even if it's not a structurally significant component of the car. Things like that.
But it happened, they got very strict when they did the tablet. So my question is, what's happening with the tablets now? Is that gone?
No, the tablets are staying.
Okay,
So I can't speak fully to this, to the interplay with the tablets and the inspection manual. I know the inspection manual has also been updated. And this is a further effort by the department. They've got experience with it. They've heard feedback. And my understanding is the department has already done a comprehensive review of the inspection manual. And this section was drafted based on an early markup of revisions that the department is planning to propose with respect to the inspection manual. So it specifically later in this section calls out the areas where they are initially proposing amendments. And it was drafted in consultation with the department, sort of flesh out what their goal is. But they have already been reviewing this and trying to identify sticking points in the inspection process that aren't actually addressing safety.
And I think we were told, maybe I'm wrong, that putting it in the bill here bypasses the rulemaking
Doesn't.
process.
So what it does is it allows them to roll out the rules quicker. So the initial request on the Senate side was to have this taken out of the APA rulemaking process, and the Senate did not agree to that. What this does instead is it gives them, it deems this rulemaking eligible for the emergency rulemaking process, which allows them to roll out the changes sooner with a temporary 180-day rule that goes under the emergency process, while at the same time proposing the permanent rule together with it. So that allows them to get these changes out more quickly. And then to adopt a permanent rule at the end of that 180-day period. So the way it works under the APA is normally to adopt an emergency rule, there has to be an imminent threat to public health, safety, or welfare. A need to update the inspection manual doesn't meet that standard. We frequently do this, though, when agencies have something ready to go, or there's a need to speed up, expedite the process. We'll say this shall be deemed to meet the standard for emergency rulemaking, even though it doesn't meet the normal standard for that. So it allows them to roll out basically a verbatim copy of the permanent rule change they're proposing at the same time. And that doesn't require the public process. It just takes effect. The permanent rule change then goes through the normal public process. They'll get comment, they can make revisions, they can hear feedback from inspection stations that are rolling out the emergency rule, and incorporate those into the permanent rule. And then ideally at the end of that, sometime in that 6-month period, the permanent rule gets finalized and adopted. And then it replaces the emergency rule.
Yeah, I guess I don't see what there is no emergency. And
No.
why we would do this. I went to that public meeting where we talked about inspections, and there was a lot of people very concerned on both sides about inspections or had specific issues. I guess I would have to think about whether, I'm in agreement that let's go ahead and move forward, because it seems like once you do it, the public comment period isn't nearly as important, doesn't feel as important once you've made the changes, but.
So I can't speak to whether this meets, justifies waiving the emergency rulemaking threshold to allow that to occur. Within the APA process, I would say that a third to a half of rules where there's an emergency and a permanent rule proposed at the same time see some sort of changes in the permanent rule. Whether they're just, purely technical changes or substantive changes, it kind of depends on the rule. But it doesn't necessarily mean that nothing's going to change when you do the emergency rules. It just that. But
And
yeah,
so these changes to go this route was DMV who.
DMV
This language.
DMV was proposing these changes. The initial proposal, like I said, was initially presented to the committee as what if we took this out of APA rulemaking so that we would have more flexibility, or so that the DMV would have more flexibility to make adjustments to the rule without having to engage the the APA rulemaking process is by design quite labor intensive and time intensive for agencies and departments. The Senate was not willing to take it out of the APA process, but they did decide that they wanted to see these changes sooner rather than later, which is why they authorized the emergency rulemaking. Again, that's a policy call. You don't have to do that. And it's, you know, I don't know if you've had a chance to speak with I keep saying the agency, the department on this a lot. But they may have additional feedback as to the process and where they're at.
It'd be good to understand the
Yeah,
reason.
I think they can give you much more information on where they're at with this rule and their proposal.
Want to just say, I got Representative Burke and then Representative White, but I want to make sure I understand what you just. We can decide, the legislature can put the bill in, or put it in that says, this doesn't, even though this does not meet emergency standards, we're overriding that and saying, yes, it's going to play under emergency standards. And this does not meet it, but the Senate you can go ahead and do that anyway.
Yep.
And then further to that, you estimated just by that in more than half the cases where a emergency spot and then permanent rule, after there is usually in half the cases or more, there is some change before.
I would say it's somewhere under half.
Okay.
But it's, I guess, between a third and a half. There is some change that occurs in the permanent rule from the emergency.
But we are allowed to push it through with emergency, even if it doesn't qualify as an emergency.
Yeah, so the emergency rulemaking standard is statutory, so like anything else, that notwithstanding clause.
I just want to make sure I understand that. And some percentage of them are changing. They don't go through always the way they were, so, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Representative Burke, you're up.
It's just interesting to me, the whole evolution of the ideas about inspection, from going to choose your garage based on who was going to inspect your car with the least amount of prescriptions. And then we go to the tablet where everybody's just like up in arms because what do you mean? This little rest on my car I can't pass inspection because of that? That was like, and then all the people having to buy the tablets, and that was a whole thing. And then we had a whole thing with the Senate about waivers and whether we could still get approval for the clean air waiver. And then I think what's happened is that people have started to push back against the restrictions. And we had a couple of bills presented here, because at first it was like, what? States don't have inspections. Some people don't even, that was sort of a shock to Vermonters. And now we're here at this place where it seems like we sort of settled in a sort of a middle ground about what's reasonable to inspect and what's not, and still keeping the clean air requirements, hopefully. Anyway, just very interesting. Different attitudes, shifting attitudes.
Because some
Representative White?
I was just.
Oh, yeah. Your rank has its, your seniority has its privileges.
Just thinking out loud.
Damien, can you remind me what APA means? Is that
Administrative Procedure Act. I'm sorry that I've spent too much time working with LCAR. The shorthand is starting to flow in.
And also to clarify what Representative Pouch saying, this language as it was drafted by, or at least originally proposed by the DMV, and the committee changed some of this, or this came entirely out of?
So this is the last sort of iteration.
After they worked on it, the committee worked on it, you worked on it.
Right.
Made changes to it. Okay.
So
It's this idea of genuine and immediate safety risks, and they're all pretty big general terms. We're trying to convey an intent. Some of these words are, I don't know, almost.
much
In some way.
I would say a significant portion of the language in the bill came from the language that the DMV provided to me at the request of the committee that sort of outlined what they were thinking, and then I shaped into this section. And then there was back and forth over edits and so forth. So I can't speak for the DMV and, you know, tell you that they're happy with all of this. I'd invite you to hear from them on how they feel about what the Senate ended up with, but, this, yeah, this was worked on with the DMV and was largely based on an outline they provided to me.
When was the law institute or the statute created by the emergency? You know, has to be an emergency. I mean, has that been in the books for a while?
As long as I've been here, it did get revised in the mid 2010s, when one of my predecessors with, as the counsel to LCAR was on his way to retirement. LCAR proposed, and I think the GovOps committees then took up a revision to the Administrative Procedure Act to update it. But some of the very first rules I dealt with were issues around whether an emergency rule actually constituted an emergency. And it was back in the day, Powerball and Mega Millions, the rules for those had to be adopted under the Administrative Procedure Act rulemaking. They no longer do. But the problem with that is the multi-state lotteries give you 60 days to update your rules when they update their rules. You can imagine for a process that takes a minimum of like 4 months, if everything goes right, that creates a lot of problems if you have to suddenly stop sales on your 2 largest selling lottery products. And so that spurred some conversation and revisions to it. And then with some of the, I don't know if it came out of COVID or if it predates COVID, we also have language in there if there's a federal requirement that you adopt a rule amendment to comply with some federal change that Congress enacts or something like that, that can also constitute an emergency.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering, like, I don't know if it matters, like, the time, length of where statutes run on the books, where it would give credence to, you know, a resident of Vermont to sue the state of Vermont saying, hey, you know, you shouldn't be doing this. You know, you have this law on the books forever. You needed a, you know, emergency to do it and you're bypassing that. I don't know if it gives any credence to somebody's gonna come in and say, hey,
Yeah, I don't.
prevent this.
I mean, so, you know, I guess my lawyer hat's on already. I don't think that a claim like that would go very far. The emergency rulemaking process is established in statute. Those requirements are not limited by the Constitution or something like that. So the General Assembly, with the consent of the governor, has the authority to override those statutory provisions. It's the same way you can't bind yourselves to things in the future. You know, so it'd be like suing the state government for changing the minimum wage or something like that. You know, or for amending the statute. So, yeah. But, you know, from a policy standpoint, it may carry more weight with you that these standards have been on the books in essentially their current form for, I mean, probably, you know, longer than you've been a state rep. So, yeah.
I was getting back to this, and the B, it says, first of all, I just want to say, I'm totally okay if we, you know, reduce the inspection requirements for things that aren't safe. So, you know, I'm not against that. On B, it says, you know, we got something that's, the tires are, you know, getting close, but they're still good. And it says, you know, become a safety risk at some time in the future. I mean, it seems like we should say within 1 year for your next inspection.
Yeah, you know, that ends up being a policy call for the committee here. And that is certainly something when we mark this up, you know, the committee could decide to look at that and look at whether this language makes sense or should be revised.
Inspection. Period.
Right.
tee it up like we do, like the waivers that we had for the EPA waiver there.
Yeah.
They had a year to fix it.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Is that some sort of a liability thing for the mechanic at that time? I mean,
Well, it's a good question. It does create a duty for the inspection mechanic to advise the vehicle owner if there is a condition on the vehicle that could constitute a safety risk in the future if it deteriorates further. So, that's a question for you. Do you want to, this is intent language, as to what the expectation is for the revisions to the inspection manual. And so if this did go into the inspection manual, there would be a requirement that, when you're an inspection mechanic, you have to comply with the provisions of the inspection manual. It's a legally binding document. So there would be a duty, assuming that this made it into the inspection manual here. So you can tweak this language. It might be worth asking the department what the current requirement is for an inspection mechanic and how far this would deviate or not from that current requirement. So that might be the place to start with this, and then to look at the language in that light and see is this a big change? Is this something that's already in the inspection manual? And I'm not familiar enough with the inspection manual to tell you whether or not there's language to this effect that's currently in there. I know there are conditions that are listed as advise versus fail, but I don't know what the advise provision relates to. So
at the time of inspection should be what matters, right? I mean, that's what I think. I think that's what it is right now. If your tires pass inspection, your brake pads pass inspection, it should be just a done deal at that point. You pass at the time of the inspection. I don't think the mechanic should be married to your vehicle for an extra few months, because he gave you an advisory or whatever, or didn't.
mhm.
You know what I mean? And say that person gets in an accident, right? Well, he never told me that, my brake pads were gonna, fail. And, and he doesn't have no control over how many miles you drive. I mean, the more miles you drive, the more wear and tear on those items that he may or may not have warned you about. I just am concerned about putting more liability onto the mechanics, I guess is what I'm kind of getting at, so.
Okay. Well, it sounds like I'll make a note to check in with the committee on this language again when we get to markup. And just see where the committee is at after hearing more testimony.
I would suspect, well, and I would also throwing out the list of that. There has to be plenty of already, this has been going on for a long time, so there's plenty of established cases or not about what the liability of that inspection mechanic is. I guess our question is what we change, what does that do to that? What does that do to open up new cases? Because there's gotta be plenty of cases that have already happened in relation to trying to sue their mechanic and whatnot for their inspection related. But if we make changes, then what would that do to that? Does it increase or reopen those things up?
Again, it's worth remembering too that this is just intent for what the amendments to the inspection manual would say.
Which is what we're gonna hear next then, is
Yeah.
what these amendments are or whatever.
Yeah, so the next piece of intent is that in preparing the amendments, the department shall specifically determine whether amendments to sections relating to the following systems and components are necessary, and those are tires, power steering, suspension, brake rotors, lighting, electrical systems and components, windshield, windows, windshield wipers, vehicle body, and in the discretion of the commissioner, any other vehicle systems or components. A couple things I want to emphasize is it's determined.
What else is there?
So the list was originally developed out of the sections where DMV has initially marked, in their initial markup, had identified potential changes. I do want to emphasize that the language is determine whether amendments to the following provisions are necessary. And so that is to give the commissioner discretion to take feedback and not be tied to having to make an amendment to each of these sections. But the initial markup included changes to each of these sections.
So are these the sections in the inspection manual now?
They're, yes, without,
To offer.
they're all areas within the inspection manual. The last one captures, there are other things in the inspection manual, even though this seems like a pretty comprehensive list. And that just allows the last K allows the commissioner to address anything else.
Two questions. One, do you know if the department shared the marked up inspection manual?
I don't remember if that was presented to the committee or not. I think it was. No? Okay. So no, it wasn't. I looked at an initial markup as I was writing this, but I don't know. I also don't know if they want that to be disclosed to the public while they're still working on it.
Cause a firestorm.
Well, yeah, when you put out proposed language that's not official,
Yeah, I get that.
it can cause confusion too during the actual process. So I certainly wouldn't want to put them on the hook.
My second question is just on the windshield. Was there any discussion at all about windshield tinting? Which now my understanding is against the law if it's been applied to a window, if it's a sticker that you can see, yet it's my understanding it's not necessarily rejected at inspection, but we did hear good testimony that it's a safety issue,
So,
particularly for public safety officers.
right, so windshield tinting is currently a failure. Drivers and passenger side windows that are tinted are not a failure. Those are advisory. And I can't speak to exactly how the department would amend those, but currently windshield tinting is a failure because of the safety issue. It is just to having a tint applied to the windshield. It is not the more complicated language that was taken out, put in the T-bill 2 years ago and taken out in last year's T-bill or motor vehicle bill. I can't remember which, but yeah.
Windshield tint beyond the federal regulations.
Right. Federal regulation allows a certain tint. It also allows the line at the top.
There was a waiver for medical center.
Vision conditions. And then when you get into the southern sunnier parts of the country, there are many states that allow a tint on the windshield because of the environmental conditions.
So, if the power steering fails on a car, can you still drive? Like, does the
Yes.
wheels still turn?
Yes, it does.
So would the power steering didn't work? Could you still drive the car?
So right now,
I mean, I don't know if that's what I'm asking.
You could
why
drive it
that
right
would be
over
a
a cliff.
safety.
yeah, so right now, if your power steering is broken, my understanding is that is a fail.
It is,
And it may become more of an advisory. But again, this is left, there's discretion here. So you can still drive a car with the power steering out. But it's just very hard to drive it, especially if it gets heavier. But that's something that they're looking at.
okay.
So again, I don't want to speak for what's going to go into it.
I mean, I know it came with power steering, but if the car still runs without it and it's not a safety issue, then why are we listing it?
Well, so these are areas that are going to be looked at for amendment.
Oh.
So areas of the current manual. So it's not saying make sure that if there's a deficiency in these areas, it's a fail. It's saying, look at them and determine whether an amendment is appropriate.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, so that's what's being looked at.
Okay.
All right. The subdivision 4 provides determine whether any tests or procedures require amendment or elimination, including the on-highway road test for brakes and the headlight headlamp aiming test. So the testimony that the Senate got was that these are two tests that are in the inspection manual and rarely performed. There are some inspection mechanics who still perform them. There are others who do not. And so there's a question of whether, and so this says determine whether or not those should be amended or eliminated altogether. Are they still necessary? And I know there are strong opinions based on some of the testimony that was heard on some of these. And then the last directive is provide additional visual guidance regarding when certain conditions warrant failure of an inspection. So examples of this were, where is body rust a problem? Where is it not a problem? Where is a windshield crack a problem? Where is it not a problem? Brake rotors, etc. Things like that, where they're a visual check can tell you, or at least tip you off that you need to do a closer inspection. So on or before August 1st, the DMV would be required to file proposed amendments with the Secretary of State and adopt the emergency rules pursuant to 3 VSA 844. And they, as I mentioned, they would be deemed to have met the standard for emergency rulemaking under 3 VSA 844A. And then the commissioner would submit to the House and Senate Committees on Transportation a report of the proposed amendments, or a copy of the summary and copy of the proposed amendments showing the changes after they're submitted. And then the final proposed rule amendments, so not more than 5 days after they are filed with the Secretary of State and Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules, file them again, submit a summary of them and an annotated copy and a copy of the responsiveness summary. And responsiveness summary is, it is a document that basically summarizes, these are the public comments and questions we got. This is our response to them. So in some cases, people will say, you need to get rid of this. And they'll respond, well, this is a genuine safety issue, or so we're keeping it in, or this is kept in for advisory purposes, or good point, we're going to take this out because it's not a genuine safety issue and we overlooked it. But it gives you a sense of what their thinking is as they've gone through marking up the rule and what the public comment is. And then finally, the third report is not more than 5 days after they've filed the adopted rule amendments with, again, the Secretary of State and the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules, submit a brief written statement on the date in which they were submitted, the effective date, and any changes that were approved by the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules. So what happens when LCAR meets is periodically they ask the committee chairs of the committees of jurisdiction and legislative council to review the amendments to ensure that they're consistent with legislative intent and statutory authority and so forth. And occasionally there are small issues that are identified there. So if there are any fixes based on that review, this would identify that, and then you'd see the final rule at that point. So it's basically 3 key stages in the rulemaking process: the initial rule, the almost final rule, and then the adopted rule. Okay, I think we're through that section. It took just 40 minutes.
And talked about a lot. And we'll, the department will be in to tell us their take on this.
Yeah.
Piece.
So the next couple sections relate to what is being called a limited use specialty vehicle. This is essentially 2 types of vehicles. There are kit cars built by an individual, not for resale, or other home-built cars. This could be a car that you reconstruct from a donor body and frame with a new engine and new components, or what are often commonly called resto mods. These are specialty cars made by boutique or very small manufacturers. The one that's made in Vermont looks like a second generation Corvette, but it's made from carbon fiber, has a 600 horsepower engine, fully modern components in it. There are others that look like classic Porsches, et cetera, Shelby Cobras, for those of you who are car enthusiasts.
Did you
And-
call them resto mod?
Resto as in restoration and modification.
Okay.
So, so these are, I've gotten a lot of questions as I've gone through this bill about where 325 comes from. That comes from the Federal FAST Act, which was enacted in, I believe, 2014. And it was trying to create a path for small manufacturers through the requirements of the Clean Air Act. And it essentially allows them to get certain exemptions if they stay below that level of resale in the US. So they don't have to sell 325 vehicles in Vermont. It's 325 vehicles for sale in the United States each year across the country. They could sell more vehicles internationally, but this is just the US vehicles. The other key is that it has to be maintained solely for occasional transportation, which can include exhibition, club activities, parades, other functions of public interest, and not used for daily transportation of passengers or property on any highway. This is the same language as we use for antique cars, which also get exemptions from certain inspection requirements. So essentially, you can take your car out occasionally to, I like to say, go down to the preemie stand on a nice summer day. This doesn't prevent you from taking your car out to the racetrack to do a track day. And it does allow you to take it out for an occasional drive on public highways, but you'll have a limited use license plate that will tell local law enforcement, if they see you out a lot, that maybe your car should be registered differently and you should be subject to different requirements. So that's what these are being defined as. So it's really two groups of vehicles that are being mushed together. The key thing that makes them alike is that they often have engines that are not a mass-produced engine. And so their engines need to meet Clean Air Act certifications when they're manufactured and installed, but they're being exempted from annual emissions inspections similar to antique cars. So these cars, you cannot sell a car in the US for the manufacturers if it doesn't meet Clean Air Act requirements. So they have to meet certain standards, but what they won't have to do with these cars is bring them in for annual emissions checks. They will still need to get a safety inspection. I'll get to that in the next section, but
So is law enforcement actually gonna enforce that, you think? I mean, how can you tell?
so with antique cars, it's a different license plate. It says antique.
Yeah,
So this would probably say specialty vehicle or something. I don't know what the license plate would look like. So there's other license plates like Street Rod is another one. That's for cars that are I want to say 1949, where the engines have been restored and updated. But yeah, those are, like they look like a 1930s car, but with the exposed engine and big wide tires, et cetera. And so these typically have limited use on public highways. They also get some exemptions from the inspection requirements as part of that.
and so say I decided I wanted to go to Maine. Might be able to go to Maine in it? Can I go take it on vacation?
No.
You're going to a specialty.
I don't think this prevents you from driving it through. I mean, you have a car that's registered for highway use. And so I think if you're traveling to, for example, classic car rally in Maine or something like that, or a meetup of people who've built, that type of kit car, I don't see anything in here that prevents it. I'm not sure if you necessarily would want to drive that car or if you'd want to put it on a trailer. It kind of depends on the person in the car.
Yeah.
But this is basically what this is getting the individual is a lower registration cost and an exemption from emissions inspections going forward. So their car has to still meet requirements when it's built. But beyond that, you'll just have to have it checked for safety to ensure that it's safe to operate on the road.
So I could build a car that looks like the Beverly Hillbillies car there, and looks like some backwoods guy built it. with the-
Your car has to pass the safety inspection.
Sure, they had safety emissions. I'm sure that passed all the emissions, that car.
Well,
I'm
and
sure.
so when you install an engine in that car, the engine you install has to be installed in a way that meets the EPA or California emissions requirements when it's installed.
I guess kind of like what I'm getting at a little bit is, does somebody have to look at it and say, hey, that you can't put that on the road just because you say it does all this.
Yeah, I mean, it has to get registered,
Somebody
titled and
looks at it.
registered and get a VIN number in the state. So yeah, there is a process to get this car registered that you have to go through. When the DMV came in to talk about this, and there's a report that is available to all of you that talks about the process of registering one of these cars. You have to provide a component list.
Yeah.
And they ensure that you've actually installed the components and so forth. So there is a process. It's not like I could just walk in with a car I cobbled together out of spare parts at home and say, oh yeah, trust me, it's good. You have to be able to show that you actually are able to meet things and get your VIN and get your registration. So there is a process. It's not a total free for all.
Right.
To get in the door. And for the manufacturers, they have to be using components that meet these standards for safety and emissions. For the kit cars, those cars generally will be meeting those standards, and you still need to, have your car get an annual safety inspection to make sure brakes work, lights work, you've got a working bumper, you've got a windshield, etc. So
Kit cars and things have been around for a long time. Is this, why do we didn't have this covered already in some way?
So what came out of that report was that essentially there is already a path to register these vehicles, but there's been a lot of ambiguity and confusion, which is what generated the report that came out of this a year ago. And so they just got lumped together.
Trucks or whatever. We didn't have enough real things to deal with. We come back and deal with the ambiguity thing. Okay.
So
I feel like we did this already a couple years. I don't know. We had
we
Milton was confused.
yeah, that was
Milton, and then I thought they went through this before.
so that was last year in the DMV bill, and that generated a very long, detailed report of requirements in our state and requirements in other states and how these cars can be registered currently, and where perhaps a little clarity could help in the law. And so that this came out of that recommendation that maybe the law should be clarified a little bit. And it looked at, there were concerns raised last year about, well, how do we ensure that they meet emissions inspection or emissions requirements and stuff like that? And the answer that came out of the report was, well, for one of these manufacturers, you have to buy a compliant engine to put it in the car. You can't sell a car for street use that doesn't have an emissions compliant engine in the US. And the same thing for these individuals who are building a kit car. You buy an engine, and it's an engine that's been manufactured already to meet emissions requirements in the US. If you're building this up for track use, then you could put on your unrestricted exhaust, etc. But then you can't register it for street use. And so that was kind of what came out of this. But the report cleared up some confusion about what the existing law already allows, which is essentially registering these, but said, a little clarity because the statute's silent with respect to these types of cars. Vermont is a very, we believe it or not, despite how many books we've got on the shelf over there, we actually have a pretty short statute when it comes to vehicles and transportation compared to other states, which have a section addressing everything under the sun. And so they just recommended adding some language to clarify what these cars were and then what they're subject to for inspections. So that brings up the next two sections. So the first is the 23 VSA 375 is a new section that allows the commissioner to issue a certificate of registration for not more than 12 limited use specialty vehicles per year. One thing I raised on my first walkthrough that I noticed then is this could be read to limit it to 12 total for the state. And my understanding of the intent was it was 12 additional per year. Maybe something you want to explore more closely. I think I may have inadvertently omitted a word there.
So you think it might be more than 12 or
So
it's like
12
last year
new,
was
12 additional.
This year is 12, so now we have 24 registered.
Right.
Okay.
And eventually some of those will be taken off the road
Okay.
and so forth.
But
Yeah.
only 12 per year.
Keeps the number down, and that's based on a California
Okay.
provision, just scaled down to Vermont size.
Okay.
So California allowed, I forget how many it was, but they have so many cars on the road that when you brought that down to the number of registered vehicles in Vermont, it came out to 12.
Okay, so then 3Ds like moose permits where you can do a little lottery, you know?
Yeah, expensive. Love it.
Yeah. So the next piece here is the annual fee is $26, which is the same as an antique. And it provides that you can use it for occasional transportation of persons, passengers, or property not to exceed 1 day per week, and use it for exhibitions, club activities, parades, etc. So you're basically limited to a day a week on the highways. And then finally, in the inspection section, notwithstanding the regular inspection requirements, a limited use specialty vehicle shall undergo a safety inspection each year, but shall not be required to undergo visual emissions or onboard diagnostic inspection.
I think we're at a good spot to
Okay.
call it for today, I think. And
All right.
we'll go from there the next time that we,
3 pages to go.
there you go,
We're close.
we're getting there. But then we'll have the DMV come back in and tell us about each of these, pages. $26.
After $500,000 for the car.
Yeah.
Yes, it's like it's pretty good deal.
I hear all this sentiment on tax based on, amount, but not versus the user fee based on how little they use the road. That's that difference, I suppose. Damien, thank you very much. You'll be back in again to get us through the last 3 or 4 pages. We are adjourned for